Alright, so here's an example of a heparin protocol. Number one here says that we have a patient who weighs 134 pounds. What is the patient's weight in kilograms? And they want us to round to the nearest 10 kilograms. So we are looking for the weight in kilograms, right? So that means our desired answer is going to be kilograms. Remember the conversion from way back in chapter 2? 1 kilogram is equal to 2.2 pounds, okay? And our patient weighs 134 pounds. So we're going to stack the 134 on top so that our pounds can cancel. So that's going to put us 134 divided by 2.2, which gives us a 60.9090909090. Check your rounding. They said they want us to round to the nearest 10 kilograms. Now this is not rounding to the 10th. Rounding to the 10th with the th on the end means one number after your decimal, so that would be a 60.9. But this is talking about the nearest 10 kilograms. So they're talking about not the ones place of the 0, but actually the tens place with this 6. So we need to round this number to the tens place. So that's 6. We got to figure out, is it going to stay a 6 or does it bump up to a 7? Well, it depends on this very next number. Now, that number, 0, is not 5 or greater. So that means it's just going to leave this with a 6. So basically we're asking, does this round to 40, 50, 60, 70, 80? It's stuff like that. Okay, rounded to the nearest 10 kilogram would be 40 or 50 or 60 or 70. Well, of course ours is going to round to 60, right? So answer for part 1 is 60 kilograms. Now, number 2 is talking about the bolus. Okay, so this bolus dose is just, it's a loading dose just to get something in their system. Okay, get some kind of heparin in them quickly. So our first question wants to know how many units they will receive for the bolus, and then they're also going to ask about how many milliliters that bolus is going to be. Okay, so up here in your heparin protocol, you see where it's talking about the bolus of heparin. We need to give 80 units per kilogram. And then for the bolus, we use the vial of heparin that has the concentration 1,000 units per milliliter. So our bolus means we're going to focus on those first 2 lines. This third line comes in and starts talking about the infusion, okay, and that's going to be what we set up on the pump, that milliliter per hour business. But this bolus is most of the time just going to be an IV push, okay, that you're just going to pull up the amount of milliliters that we saw for and put it in a syringe for an IV push. So our bolus, first of all, we have to tackle the units. Okay, so let's go up there to that top line and realize we need to give 80 units per kilogram. And we know our patient weighs 60 kilograms, right? So desired answer here is units, which means I'm going to stack the 80 units on top because that's my desired answer. And I'm just getting that from the protocol up there. 80 units per 1 kilogram. Now I put a kilogram at the bottom, so that means I need kilogram at the top over here so that they can cancel. So that should work out to give us 4,800 units. So we'll fill that in up there in that blank. Now, we're still not done with number 2. Yes, it's 4,800 units of heparin, but how much am I supposed to put in that syringe? Okay, and heparin goes back to the milliliter syringes. This is not insulin syringes where we measure in units. Okay, we do need to measure with milliliters. So this is where if we have our desired answer of milliliters, we're going to pull in this from the second line, the concentration, that 1 milliliter is 1,000 units. Okay, so the concentration for the bolus, we use a special vial, and its concentration says that 1 milliliter of fluid has 1,000 units of heparin in it. And we know that from the previous answer, we need to give 4,800 units of heparin, right? So that's why we had to figure out that piece, is because we needed it over here. So that makes sure our units cancel. We wind up dividing and we get 4.8 milliliters. Okay, so we grab the syringe with the needle and we pull it all up, 4.8 milliliters. We do an IV push. Our patient has their bolus. Okay, so now we're getting ready to set them up with an IV. Okay, so number 3 is talking about the IV infusion. Okay, we're past the bolus. That was just an IV push. Now we're into the infusion. This is the one that's we're gonna hang a bag of heparin and it's gonna drip for hours. Okay, so we need to figure out how many units our patient is receiving per hour, and what is that calculated as milliliter per hour. because, I mean, that's our total goal here, is to figure out what we're going to set the pump for, right? So, for the infusion, be sure that you're using the third line from this protocol. Infusion is supposed to happen at 18 units per kilogram per hour, and we're using a different concentration here, right? We have 25,000 units and 250 milliliters with D5W. Okay, so those are different numbers than what we used for the bolus. I want you to make note of that. All right, so units per hour, we're gonna tackle this first little bit. 18 units per kilogram per hour, right? So if we're solving for units per hour, that's our desired answer, then we're gonna stack 18 units on top of kilogram an hour because, again, we need units on top. Now, we are okay with hour being in the bottom. That is part of our desired answer. But we do need to get rid of the kilograms, right? So let's multiply by the weight again, 60 kilograms, and just pair your weight with 1, that's fine. So kilograms cancel, we have units on top, hour on bottom, so we're ready to do our math. 18 times 60 is going to give you 1,080 units per hour. Now, milliliter per hour. Well, we're going to be looking for milliliter on the top, and in that third line, it did tell us that 250 milliliters is 25,000 units. So let's pull that down here. Milliliter per hour. We're going to put the milliliters on top of the hours. And again, this just came from the protocol up there, third line. Now that puts units in the bottom. So I need units in the top. And again, I'm just going to pull over this previous answer. We know we were supposed to give 1,080 units per hour. So units cancel, milliliter on top, hour on bottom. So multiply the top, divide by the bottom. It should turn out to be 10.8 milliliter per hour. Okay, we don't write that last zero. We just leave it as a 10.8 milliliter per hour. Now, earlier, when we were figuring out milliliter per hours, back in chapter 9 and 10, I don't know if you noticed, but I had to count off points if it wasn't rounded to a whole number. Okay, all of those typical IVs are going to be rounded to whole numbers, milliliter per hour. But with the heparins, we can get a little bit more precise and go to 1 decimal place. Okay, so we gave our bolus earlier on number 2. Now we've set up the pump for 10.8 milliliter per hour, and we're going to let them sit with their IV pole for, 4-6 hours, whatever the order says. Okay, and then we've got to come back and do an aPTT test. Okay, so when we get the results back from that test, that says that our patient's reading at a 31. So then we have to figure out what kind of changes do we make, okay? So a 31 is going to put us in category A, less than 35 seconds. So we know that we need to give another bolus, 80 units per kilogram for a bolus, and we're going to increase our drip, okay? So our patient's not getting enough heparin yet, okay? They're still clotting too quickly. The sweet spot that we're aiming for is category C, okay? But 31 seconds is still pretty low. They're going to need more heparin. Now you'll notice category B still asked you to give a bolus, but it was just half strength, right? Just 40 units per kilogram. And it did ask us to increase the drip as well. I don't have my number written in there, but we don't need it for this part anyways. Okay, so 31. We need to give another bolus and increase the drip. So number 4 is asking about the bolus. So really focus in on those questions. It's asking bolus or the infusion, because that will help you decide if you need to be looking at line 2 or line 3 from your protocol up here. All right, so for the bolus, we got to figure out how many units and how many milliliters. So for our units, it said to give 80 units per kilogram. Right? So 80 units is 1 kilogram. Our patient still weighs 60 kilograms. So 4,800 units. That's the same thing we got earlier, right? Because the initial bolus was a 40 unit per kilogram, just like this one, okay? Now, those won't always be the same. These heparin protocols change, okay? But for this case, yeah, it was the same as your initial bolus. The second half of this, the milliliters. Well, it's going to be the same as well, right? We're still using, from the second line, the vial of heparin for the bolus is 1 milliliter contains 1,000 units, okay? And we need to give 4,800 units, so that's still going to be 4.8 milliliters of heparin for a bolus. Okay, so that's the same thing as what we had gotten on part 2. But again, if we were in category B, it would only be half of that, right? Because we would go with a 40 unit per kilogram bolus. Okay, so we give that bolus with an IV push, and then it also talks about the infusion. All right, so remember up here when it says to increase the drip by 4 units per kilogram per hour. Well, increase what drip? I mean, we're not going back to what we have set in the IV, on the IV pump, because that's figured in milliliter per hour. This is saying we got to increase the units per kilogram per hour. So go back up here to line 3, and it's that 18 units per kilogram per hour. So we're looking at those units there, units per kilogram per hour, units per kilogram per hour. So make sure you're comparing apples to apples here. Again, we are not going back to the IV pump because that's set in milliliters per hour. And this is not saying to bump your milliliter per hour up, it's saying bump your units per kilogram per hour up. So the original was 18, and we need to increase it by 4. So 18 plus 4 is going to give you a 22. So when we run our math this time, units per hour, we're going to work with the 22 because we took the original 18 and we were told to increase it by 4, so we're working with 22 units per kilogram per hour. Our patient still weighs 60 kilograms, so we get 1,320 units per hour. And number 6 wants to know for the infusion, what is your milliliter per hour? So this is going to be where we change it on the pump, okay? But do not go and just tack it up 4 places, okay? That's not going to work. So we go back to milliliter per hour, and up here on our 3rd line, for the infusion, it did tell us to use 250 milliliters as 25,000 units. We pull in our previous units per hour from number 5, and we get 13.2 milliliter per hour, okay? Now, I did want to remind you back on the previous problem, the first time we did this, before the aPTT results, our old rate was 10.8 milliliters per hour, and now it's 13.2, okay? So I just wanted to verify with you that you're not just adding that 4 to your milliliter per hour, okay? That's not going to work. It's the 4 is being added to the units per kilogram per hour, where the original was 18. So be very careful with that.